Oh, that theme music means it's time for one thing, and that is IMNSHOW, in my not so humble opinion, show where I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about, or do a podcast record with someone I really enjoy podcasting with, and you can guess which I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be podcasting with the lovely and the talented Beth Fisher, who, I met, I don't know, maybe a month ago via podcast, and frankly, I'm a little bit in love. Not in that kind of way, but kind of in the intellectual way, because I met someone who's like, I think I get you, and I appreciate you. And that's why when I find someone like that, I tend to fall in love a little quickly. Ask my wife of 25 years. She's seen it happen before. Hopefully, this will be a much longer relationship than most of those little mini intellectual crushes. But I will say this. For podcast listeners, and by the way, we're live streaming this, and my camera looks like absolute crap because I'm having tech issues, but she looks marvelous, simply marvelous. And for podcast listeners, I'm going to start it out this way. Beth, my wife will fight you for your hat. I'm saying this because Beth is wearing a Yellowstone Dutton Ranch hat, which my wife Elizabeth and I have just started watching. Well, I guess we're probably in season 3 of Yellowstone, starring Kevin Costner. Starring Kevin Costner and others, including, I think, just about everybody's favorite female character, which is Beth Dutton, who's played by an Irish actress or an English actress, but you would never know it. What do you know what her name is?
I don't off the top of my head, but I will tell you that this hat is also second in my attire lineup, because my first favorite is a yellow t-shirt that says, and I quote, "In a world filled with Karens, be a Beth."
There you go. Because Beth Dutton, if you watch Yellowstone, Beth Dutton is a force of nature that you do not want to cross. In fact, they've had several episodes that have had bears as kind of major plot points. I think those bears go running away from Beth Dutton because, my God, she is, as she said, "You're the trailer park and I'm the tornado."
She's the bigger bear.
Yeah, she is the much bigger bear, which is kind of a good description for Beth Fisher, too, because you are not only as fearless as Beth Dutton from Yellowstone, but dare I use another word with a suffix of less, which is remorseless?
Yes.
The reason I say that is because Beth has written a book called, and I was reading in it today, I might add, her book is called Remorseless, Learning to Lose Labels, Expectations, and Assumptions Without Losing Yourself. Now, I want her to talk, but I just want to set it up for her, which is, as you know, this podcast is all about knowing yourself, and her book is about not losing yourself. So I want to investigate that kind of intersection. When you say remorseless, how to learn to lose labels, expectations, and assumptions without losing yourself, what do you mean? Well, first of all, can you define remorseless for us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So remorseless means without guilt in spite of wrongdoing. Without guilt in spite of wrongdoing. So I'm a big believer that many of us make decisions in life based on guilt, based on the shoulds, right? Shoulds is my absolute, probably least favorite word in our language. And you know, DP, that I love words. So I don't like the shoulds. I don't like the guilt. I don't like the labels, the assumptions, the expectations. I was the recipient of many, many labels growing up, and oftentimes still am. The difference is today I know who I am, and so I don't succumb to those labels, whereas in the past, I very much tried to. And I'm convinced, as I wrote in the book, that we do one of two things when people try to categorize us based on labels and expectations and assumptions. We either try to live up to those expectations, or we go the other way and try to defy those expectations. And in either case, we end up showing up in a way that is not authentic to ourselves. We end up living with guilt as opposed to without it. And so I did that for many, many years. Yes. And I love teaching people, you know what, be who you were created to be, because you've always known who that is. You've just gotten off of the track due to people assuming things about you and the expectations all around us.
Well, longtime listeners of this podcast will recognize a lot of concepts that we have in common, especially regarding the fact that you need to know who you are so that you can be truly who you are. Or as I like to say, know who you are so you can be it. You have to know who you are. Now, you implied that we've always known who we are, but we don't necessarily align the who we know ourselves to be with the life we choose to live. And in fact, we seek labels, to apply labels to us, to ourselves, ranging from I'm a graduate of this university, I have this degree, I go to this church. Not only do I go to this church, but this flavor of this specific religion. And it gets down to this kind of micro niching of labels to prove that you are, I guess, signifying that you are a member of a tribe, or that you ascribe to a certain, mindset or set of rules, etc. And you're all about trying to take those labels out. I was reading in your book today that if anyone's kind of a label phobic person, that would be you. And you talk about why that is. What are labels to you, and why do you have such a deep aversion to them?
Yes, utter disdain. Labels to me are adjectives. They are descriptors to describe who people think we are. And I will tell you, the reason I have such disdain is because I have been labeled multiple adjectives over the course of my almost 50 years, ranging anywhere from dumb, smart, pretty, terrible, ugly, fat. I mean, all of the myriad of, I guess, the range of adjectives, right? And many in polar opposition to one another. So in my head, when I would hear those, I would just kind of stop and think, which one is it? And is there any sort of middle ground? And what do I actually believe? But I wasn't able to land on what I believe, because I would have people that I really thought knew me. I really thought saw me and understood me. And I had that sense of belonging that we all crave. So I would put actually way more weight on the labels that they prescribed to me than I would with people that did not know me as well. And so for me, the disdain comes in the shape of, you don't really know me. If you did, I'd like to know what adjectives you'd really use. I'd like to know what you'd really think of me. And I'd also like to have a discourse that says, if you know me, you know I'm going to push back. And you know that what I'm going to say is, why do you think that? I'm not going to say I'm going to ask it, because I am a questioner. I'm the consummate inquisitive, always have been, which sort of goes to my point of I've the way that I was at age 3 is the way that I am 47 years later. It's just who I've always been. So for me, it's a questioning of, why do I believe this person? That's what I've had to reconcile over the course of my journey. I've had to ask myself the harder question of, why did you listen to that? Why did you believe that? And why did you show up like that? To make them feel better is really always the answer. The answer is that when people define us, when people say you are fill in the blank, smart, pretty, hot, ugly, stupid, again, go on with the list. It's honestly to make themselves feel more comfortable. It's to make them oftentimes feel more comfortable in your presence, to make them feel greater than, rather than opposed to presumably lesser than, right? So my experience has taught me that people are rooting for you to a point. They want you to succeed up until such time as they feel threatened by you, or they feel like, well, that's a little too much for me to take, so now I'm going to bring them back down. It's very middle school behavior. And that's been the roller coaster. That's been the ebb and flow of my life until I finally said, I'm done. I'm no longer going to listen to those labels, because I already know. And it's exhausting trying to, again, either live up to those defined labels by others or rail against them. Because either way, it's sort of a lose-lose proposition.
Yeah, I just find my head nodding off my neck when I talk to you, because you say things a little bit differently than I do, but they're really the same thing, which is I see people, especially when they're young, try to apply labels to them to give them authority. You know, I have this BA in this, an MBA in that. You know, it's often been said that anyone who's gone to Harvard will let you know they've gone to Harvard within the first 2 minutes of meeting them, because they're seeking to apply that Harvard label to themselves to impress you, to, I don't know, achieve a level of authority that they can lord over you, whatever it is. But people seek for external validation of who they are, or what their narrative of themselves is, rather than truly knowing who they are. Because to me, labels are all just kind of packaging things. They're on the outside of the package rather than the product inside the package, if you will, when it comes to personal branding. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff doesn't apply. Like if you say, well, I'm a medical doctor, that's a key part of my brand. I go, not necessarily. Because a key part of your brand is actually far deeper or far more first principle than that, which is, I'm a really analytical person. Okay, you're analytical, which is great. And yet I have a really human side that makes me a great empathetic person. So when that allows me to listen more deeply and use my analytical mind to then diagnose more accurately. Oh, so you're an analyst who's an empath. Now let's find a third word, and you've got your personal brand foundation kind of nailed, dude. And none of that has to do with medical doctor. None of that has to do with a degree. It has to do with who you are. I'm an empathetic analyst who then does what? Well, I'm really good at getting people to actually take that diagnosis and achieve great results because what? I guess I've inspired them to do it. You're an inspirational analyst who's also empathetic. That makes you a great doctor. Do you see? The doctor doesn't come in yet. It's about the first principle ideas. And I want to point to you, Beth, and say, after reading your book, you have a great personality, but as you write about, that kind of feisty intellectual part of you, a lot of guys say that, I really like the feisty intellectual part of you, until, can you talk about that a little bit? I mean,
oh, absolutely. All day long. I can talk about that. Yes. And I do write about that. I share a piece of that, which is as follows. Men in particular have, at least again, in my experience, been enamored by that. Wow. She's so funny. She likes sports. She's educated. She can keep up, right? She's interesting, again, with the labels and the adjectives and the descriptors. So there's an immediate sort of, I guess, attraction to that. People are drawn to that. Men in my lifetime have been drawn to that. And so they seek to be around that. And they sometimes have been able to be around it for longer times than others, right? I.e., I dated. Right. Throughout my upbringing, I had one boyfriend. I was married right out of college, and then I was remarried. So it's a longer story. But throughout those times, and even, after my first two marriages ended in divorce, it's because of the second part of that, which is they might be enamored by that. They might be attracted to that. They might seek to win that. But once they have that, then all of a sudden it's a different story. It's for everything that they thought they wanted in me, they began to no longer like that about me and in me, and instead felt threatened by it, especially throughout their own insecurities, throughout their own questioning. If they did not know who they truly were and their worth and their mattering and their value and all the things that they were incredibly gifted at, then I somehow became the benchmark by which to say, I'm no good. Who does she think she is? So then it became that middle school mentality again to sort of tear me down, put me in my place, and no longer like me. And as I wrote in the book, I became very confused. I thought, I've not changed. Why do their feelings about me change? Because I remember very, very specifically when I was the recipient of their adoration, when I was the recipient of them saying, "You're the best, you're amazing, I've never met anybody like you in my lifetime, you're so special," all the words, right? And then it was, "I can't stand you. Why do you think you're so smart? You're not funny. You don't have a lot of friends." It was the antithesis of everything that they originally portrayed to be their feelings, about me. And then it was the opposite. And I thought, well, I'm confused.
Well, okay. Part of my brand is to be provocative. I mean, 3 keywords, phrases, whatever. I call them the key 3. My key 3, as everybody who listens to this podcast knows, are creative, collaborative, and provocative. The big P is the most important one. And sometimes when I'm being provocative, I'm not trying to ever be unkind. But sometimes I'm trying to jolt people kind of intellectually to think a little bit more or think differently or look at things differently. So if I say something that might trigger something, I apologize in advance. Expect good intent. Just assume good intent on everything I say. That's my way of saying I'm going to tell you something that's not related, but it's metaphorical to the thing you described, which is don't live where you want to vacation. What does that mean? My entire life, I wanted to live in the mountains of Colorado. And guess what? I lived in the mountains of Colorado. I thought I'd ski, rock climb, mountain bike every day, all that stuff. And the reality is, no, you don't do that. You have to paint the kids' room. You have to fix some plumbing. You've got to go down the hill into Denver, into Lakewood to go to Costco. And that's a half a day trip because it's always going back up the hill into the mountains. And what a pain that is. And all of a sudden you realize the romance of living in the mountains is actually blown out of the water by the realities of, oh, I'm living in the mountains and everything is a 2-hour drive away from here, round trip, if not more. And that's a drag. I lived where I loved to vacation. Well, and I'm going to let you apply that to you or anything you're talking about there. But the reality is those gentlemen who said, I love your feisty nature and stuff like that is, I love it in small bites. Or, I like it for a period of time, but I don't want to live there. And the key thing is you've embraced the feisty, intellectual, exciting, interesting, extroverted part of yourself without fear or any type of hesitancy, because you've reached an age where you go, you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm not going to try to change myself to suit something that I can't even follow what you want, dude. Well, that is it's a losing game. Mm-hmm. I can't try to match something if I can't even follow what that something is. How would I embrace what I am, what people around me have identified and recognized and reflected back to me as valuable about myself? And the part of that is accept the fact that I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Mm-hmm. That takes
a long time.
Oh my God, that takes a lot of power to be able to do that. And I think that power comes because you've been through, let's just say, miles of barbed wire and broken glass and mud and piranha-filled swamp in your life. And, you don't need to go into any more detail than you care to about that, but you've had a more difficult life than I think a great many people have. And yet you've come out the other side stronger for it. Can you talk about that at all? I mean, where did your resilience come from? Because remorseless is one thing, and you are apparently remorseless from what I can tell, but you've got this core resilience in you that I think is kind of your superpower, Wonder Woman.
It is a bit. And I'll tell you, it wasn't always the case. It came and went. And a lot of it was through those rough experiences that you spoke about. And I'll talk about those in a second. But what I heard you say, you almost said the word abandonment. And I want to camp there for a second because you're absolutely right. Fear of abandonment was the result of those years of experientially hard seasons of life. Fear of abandonment was because of those times when I tore that defense mechanism down. And I said, sure, I believe the words you're speaking to me right now. Let's be in a relationship. I believe that you love me unconditionally. And time again, my experience proved the opposite of that, which is they loved me until, like you said, it was no longer small doses, but it was like, hey, here I am. We're in this thing. Let's spend our lives together in the case of marriage. Let's spend an inordinate amount of time together in the case of my first, 10-year relationship pre-marriage. And until they got to the point that they were just completely done, I believed still very much in the power of words and actions aligning. I believed in the power of showing up authentically. And then bit by bit, chip away by chip away, I became a lesser version of myself to make them feel better. And so that fear of abandonment was great in me for many, many years thereafter. And I think that's the result of what many people who do know who they are, but then sort of succumb again to those relational descriptors and labels, that's what happens. They say, I'm done. I got to that point in my late 30s where I was absolutely done. My second husband had left me. And yes, when I was 25, I was diagnosed with leukemia, and there is no cure. And they said, you're going to die. So in my very early years, I just turned 25 years old. And sort of parenthetically here, my daughter turns 25 tomorrow. So it's a really interesting time for me in retrospect and reflection to say, wow, tomorrow she is the age that I was when I was diagnosed with an incurable kind of cancer. And I was hard on myself. I thought, you deserve this. This is God's punishment to you for going through a divorce. P.S. My husband left me, so I didn't really have much say in the matter, but I still took on that ownership of it's my fault. I'm a failure. We talked about this a little bit. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. I am very much about achieving, and I'm also a very secondary 8 on the Enneagram for those listeners who understand what that is. And I will champion social justice causes all day long. Unsurprisingly, a lot of gender equity issues. And so, for me, I just thought, I don't know what to do anymore. I am 25 years old. I am faced with this almost insurmountable life situation that I have no experience with. But yet on some level, I feel like I very much deserve this result, this diagnosis, this incurable kind of cancer, because I certainly caused this by being me. That was the hardest thing for me to figure out. And I watched one by one. I had a bone marrow transplant. I was in the hospital for 35 days. I watched one by one everybody else around me die. They didn't make it. And so I thought to myself, my very, intellectual, as you called it, just my constant thinking, why? Why are they dying and I'm not? Like, I thought I was the bad person here. What did these guys do to deserve this? Like, are they divorced more than once? I really don't know. I was, again, 25 years old. I look at my daughter, who is amazing and independent and just this incredibly kind and loving human doing amazing things in the world. But I think, man, she's young. And so I now am able to give myself that grace of being remorseless, right? I no longer have guilt for the things that I went through, but the resiliency came, at least in that season of my life, out of there is no other option. And so oftentimes when we are faced with things in life that have these seemingly insurmountable outcomes and like situations, you just go, all right, I have two choices here. I am going to show up and do everything I can physically, mentally, spiritually, etc., to get through this season, to get through this bone marrow transplant, understanding I have no idea what the outcome here is going to be. Or my other option is to just call it in, right? I'm just going to lay in bed and just not really try. I've never been a quitter. I've never been one not to try. I have always said, I don't know what I'm made of, but I'm going to find out. And to me, it's almost the greatest sort of waste of a life or waste of humanity almost, because we are all made with so much power inherently that we've allowed others to take from us. We've allowed others to label us and say, you're weak, you're nothing, you're stupid. Again, all of, the negative connotations. But we have all of these things that we're so powerful in, and all we have to do is show up and try. It's not a guarantee that the outcome is going to be what mine was. I mean, I'm alive, obviously, 25 years later, but it is a guarantee that we have some semblance of control in those moments. And I think for me, when people feel such a sense of, I have no control, right? As recently as COVID, as we all know. And we just go, I'm done. I'm not even going to try because why bother? And my resiliency says, what do you mean, why bother? You're here. Give it a whirl. See what you can do. Because even if the outcome is a negative one, whatever that means, right? That's obviously couched in presuppositions and expectations as well. But even if it's not the outcome that you want or the one that you are most fearful of, you've at least given it a shot. Because if it's already going to happen and you're already sort of like giving into the fact that, well, this negative thing's going to happen, it's like becoming an atheist, right? I heard one time Sam Harris and he's very well spoken, and he is this sort of renowned atheist, and he was speaking with of course I'm going to forget his name at this point, Rick Warren, Saddleback Church, and it was this discussion about, does God even exist? And it was back and forth, very bright men, and if you were uncertain of your belief system, you would absolutely go, well, I'm listening to Sam Harris, there's no God. Oh, I'm listening to Rick Warren, there's definitely a God. Like, you could buy into what either one of them were saying because they were that well spoken and they had such certitude in their belief systems. And if you were unwavering, you would go in either camp, right? Well, at the end of that whole sort of debate and conversation, Rick Warren looked at Sam Harris and he said, I hear you, I get it, but I have one question. If you're right, there is no God, and I'm wrong, I've lost nothing. But what if the opposite is true? What if I'm right and there is a God? Then you've lost everything, right? So it's almost like, why not show up and try, right? Because if you've already sort of got everything to lose, you've already called it a day. Well, I'm just going to die of cancer. Well, I'm just never going to be loved again because this person left me. Well, I'm never going to get another job. I'm always going to be fill in the blank. Then you've already sort of secured your outcome. And if that's what it is, and if that's what you're so afraid of, then give the opposite a try, right? Show up and be resilient. That's where I come from.
Well, and let me tell you, all this stuff that we're talking about today is really a setup for our conversation next week, because we're treading on a whole bunch of different issues here that, again, excite me like you cannot believe, especially the whole discussion about belief and faith and grace and all that stuff. And Beth and I are actually working together on some stuff regarding that, but that's a totally different podcast. This one still is about personal branding and small business branding, and we need to find a way to make all this stuff make sense. But don't worry, we will. Because this whole idea of being remorseless, again, the definition you gave, which comes right out of your book, is remorseless, without guilt, in spite of wrongdoing. I love that definition because it's not saying without guilt because I don't deserve it. It's, yeah, I've done some stuff, but that's not going to stop me. And I want to talk more about next week about how we can apply that remorselessness to help more effectively personally brand ourselves and our businesses so that we can be more successful and aligned and, dare I say, authentic while doing business, while serving others. Because let's face it, that's what we're in business to do, which is serve others, to help others, to provide them with the services and solutions and products that can enable them to achieve something. How we do it, who we are, what we do, how we do it, these are the things that this podcast is all about. And as you can see, I think you've met someone that you need to bring into your life a little bit. Her name is Beth Fisher. And again, her book is called Remorseless. The full title is Remorseless: Learning to Lose Labels, Expectations, and Assumptions Without Losing Yourself. Where can people pick up this lovely book?
Yeah, thank you. It's available anywhere books are sold, as they say, i.e. Amazon. It's out on Amazon and also on my website, which is bethfisher.com.
Well, and if someone wanted to contact you or get engaged with you via social media, is there a channel that you prefer?
Yeah, honestly, the quickest way is to go to bethfisher.com, and all of my social channels are out there. But I am, on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and occasionally I tweet things, but not as often as the other two. So yeah, bethfisher.com will take you to all of those places.
But I would be a terrible podcaster if I didn't tee up this golf ball for you. Do you have a podcast that people could hear more of your lovely voice and ideas?
I do, DP. It's called the Remorseless Podcast. Is anybody surprised? It is called the Remorseless Podcast. I also do, used to be a weekly show, and now it is monthly because, again, I am learning to slow down, which is shocking. I never thought I'd say those words, but it's now monthly, and it's called Remorselessly Biblical. So, my branding, I know this is exactly what this show is about, is all around the remorseless brand, which means without guilt. I had 30 years of Catholicism. So for any listeners that also grew up Catholic, you understand that we do the guilt game really well. And it's just one of those things that I am adamant holds us back from becoming the people that we were meant to be, from living life like you want to do, right? Like you want to fill in the blank. And what is holding you back? Guilt. If I do this, somebody's going to feel badly about it. If I say these things, somebody might think a certain thing about me. So you feel guilty before you've even done sort of the crime, but those are expectations. The crimes are just constructs socially, religiously, parentally, relationally, whatever. Those are constructs from other people. And we've got to understand that those other people also are dealing with the exact same things that we're talking about here, which is humanity, right? It is literally everyday humanity. It is being a very human being, which has all of the trials and tribulations that we face as being humans. But I'm a big believer that we're spiritual beings having this very human existence. So instead of being divisive about it, why don't we rally around each other and sort of say, you know what, you're really good at this. I'm terrible at this. As an example, I'm a big picture thinker. Details, I don't have the patience for it. I know they're important. I know that has, sort of makes the whole world run. But at the same time, I'm like, if I'm not looking 86 steps ahead, I can't function very well. So for me to sort of say, that is who I am, and understand that it is this sort of camaraderie, this unification of differences, to say it's like team, right? It's the desire and that sort of the definition of team, of living like a good teammate, of loving others well. I grew up playing sports, and I'm like, I was a point guard. I brought the ball up the floor, but you put me under the hoop. I'm not getting many rebounds. I'm 5'4". So to me, it's like if I'm bringing the ball up the floor and I can see the big picture floor, but somebody else is a very detailed person. Like, I got to box this person out. I'm going to bring this ball down. I'm going to, dish it out here. And this is what's going to happen. That's what makes a team run. Organizationally, same thing. Relationally, familial, same thing. So instead of getting sort of all uptight that somebody else does something better than you, why don't you embrace that? That is how I really sort of purport to living, because I'm interested in other people's abilities. Things that I can't do, I don't get mad about. I'm like, teach me how, if I care about it. Or I'm like, wow, keep doing that. I'm going to keep doing this thing over here. And together, we're going to actually do amazing things for the benefit of other people.
Well, Beth is clearly not a zero-sum game player. And instead, we're going to talk about the plus game next week. But I'm so excited to have her back again, because having a half-hour conversation with Beth just does not happen in my world. So instead, we're going to go ahead and bring it all to next week's episode as well. I am, of course, your host, DP Knudten. I would love for you to like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast, because that really does help other people find it. And she is
Beth Fisher.
And we'll be talking at you again next week. Bye-bye. So, live stream viewers, we're going to take a pause, and guess what? Oh, it's next week already. And so we're going to go right into the second half of this conversation with the incredibly wonderful Beth Fisher, who I'm just adjusting your head in the frame. There we are. We're a little bit more parallel there. So, last week, I left you with this idea, or this phrase, zero-sum game. Are you familiar with that phrase when it comes to the way humans operate?
I think I hear that in a different capacity than it's meant. So if you tell me what you mean by it, I will sort of elaborate from where I come from.
Okay. A zero-sum game is a game where, let's say there are 10 things. If I take 7 of those things, that means only 3 are available to you. If I take all 10, you get nothing. It's a zero-sum game. A lot of people like to live life like it's a zero-sum game. But then there are other people who like to live it as an absolutely open, sustainable, scalable, it can be as big as you want. Let me say it this way. I once worked at an ad agency, and one of the people on staff died suddenly in a car accident coming home from a PTA meeting. And it was like one of those, oh my God, he was 40 years old. He has a family. Just one of those things that breaks your heart. And at the service they had for him, I don't know who it was. Somebody said he was a man who lived his life like the fact that he would never blow out someone else's candle would ever make his burn brighter. Mm. And that's, to me, like the definition of not a zero-sum game, meaning if I blow out your light, mine burns brighter. A lot of people feel that way. Mm. I'm not getting that feeling from you, Beth. It sounds like you're more like you bring your best game, I'm going to bring my best game, and as a team, we're going to keep doing better and better and better and better. The plus idea that Walt Disney talked about. You plus, I plus your plus, you plus my plus, 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 plus. Everything gets better. Am I?
The opposite of, yes.
Yes.
Opposite of scarcity mindset, yes. And so now, I'm tracking with you. And that's exactly how I live. It's how I've always lived. I've never been dissuaded by other people's abilities. I might have been intrigued. I might have said, help me understand more. How do you know this? Like, why do you like this? Help me become this. And so, as an example, in my, I say early midlife crisis, which was never a crisis at all. I just, again, like to say, okay, this is what people ascribe to. So let's go. Basically what it means is I want to learn more. I'm still growing. I'm still being transformed. I'm still being shaped. In OPS, I always want to play the drums. Why wouldn't I try now? So I bought a kit and I started to play, and I would go to people who have been doing that or who were doing that since they were like 10, 11, 12 years old, sometimes even younger. And I'm like, show me what you know. I never once thought to myself, wow, I don't like them because they're good. I thought they're good, so teach me. And I think that if more of us had that mindset, where you're exactly right, it's not a zero-sum game. There's plenty to go around. We are in this thing together. And so if we could say somebody who's either up ahead on their journey and has learned some very important principles by which we can live, or somebody who is just very gifted and skilled in something that was honestly given to them, a spiritual gifting, as I like to say, right? I came out of the womb not knowing how to draw anything other than stick figures. And yet Van Gogh was alive at one point, right? I don't think he just drew stick figures. So part of it is like, if I want to know how, I need to be curious. I need to be inquisitive, and I need to not be somebody that tears somebody else down for doing good things in the world. I need to learn from them. That's how we grow. It's to say, I have this admission that I am not these things, and that is okay. They are those things, and that's also okay. So what do we do together, right? What do we do together to make this more interesting, to make this a learning situation, so that I can walk away knowing that I am secure in who I am, that person is secure in who they are, and what can we do for one another instead of take? I'm always a giver. At least I try to be, right? I try to say, what can I give you from this interaction? How can I be of service to you? And in so doing, I always receive something. Always.
Yeah, well, that abundance mindset that is the opposite of a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
That is a hard thing for people to get if they are not exposed to it. And I'm not here to talk about anything too spiritual or religious or anything like that. But even in businesses, competition, let's face it, a lot of businesses are in competition. People are in competition. People compete for the same job. How can you embrace an abundance mindset if you're in competition for a position against other people that you work with?
I love
do you have
this
any
question.
Thoughts about that?
Oh, all day long. Yes. I had 25 years of corporate sales and consultancy work. And one of the things that I found very off-putting. So let me back up a second. When I was 21 years old, it was my first job right out of college. I had no idea what business was, and yet I was a business consultant. So moment of pause there. And I was in the world, and I was going into organizations of all shapes and sizes, industry agnostic. And I was saying, hey, hi, hello, I'm 21. I just graduated from The Ohio State University. I am fresh off of High Street. Please let me help you automate your finance within this Fortune 500 company. Now, people are very gracious when you ask them to help you. So I would say, can you help me understand what accounts payable is, please? Because by context, I understand that there are accounts somewhere and presumably you're paying somebody. I don't know who that is. And so when I would walk in these organizations and I would learn these things, I would understand that I am a salesperson, right? And so people who were much further ahead in their journeys, business people, would look at me and say, oh, right, isn't she sweet? Isn't she cute? She has some idea of what this first job is right out of college. And she's here to tell me what I already know. And yet they also knew that in sales, my job was to sell something, only what I had in sort of my toolkit, right? I had certain software that I was there to sell. Now, not the only VAR, value added reseller in the world, who was also selling software. So my competition was also inside of that same organization. I have no idea if they were 21, 41, 61, but probably with much more experience than I had. And yet I thought to myself, how do I differentiate? Right? That is what it's about. And so sometimes what differentiation looked like was saying, I can't help you. You know what? I hear what you need. Many years later, I understood what they needed. And I would say, I'd be the first person to say, I'm not even going to write you a purchase agreement. I'm not going to give you a scope of work. I'm going to say, you know what? You're better served down the street. And I truly meant that, because I would have felt fraudulent saying, please buy this thing for X amount of dollars for your company and organization, knowing that it was not going to give them an ROI, knowing that it was not going to save them any sort of efficiencies and process automation. And I instead would point them in a direction that would give them those things. Always it came back full circle, and always they would say, you know what? These are people in my circle that I know could be benefited by what I was offering at the time, and they would bring those folks my way. So showing up authentically, I've never been a person to say, what can I get? Again, a giver. I wanted to give them good information. I didn't want to take something unnecessarily, because eventually those customers would be not good customers at all, because they would look at me down the road and say, why did you sell me this thing? It's garbage. And then that is branding, right? That becomes this organization, this individual representing that organization. You don't want to do business with them. But a lot of people feel like, man, I have closing ratios, I have expectations, I have all of these things that I have got to do right now. So whatever my narrative is, it's because I'm going to get something. I'm going to be taking these dollars so that I can look good. I never functioned like that. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, that's because I can see it dripping off you. You are a relationship person, not a transaction person or a transactional person. And yes. Boy, that's a key thing to know about yourself, because, and again, I'm not here to say individuals' personal brands are better or worse than someone else's. They are either aligned with who they are, what they do, and how they do it, or not. And I love to give the example of Walmart versus Target. And I love to ask people, do you see a difference between these brands that sell Tide in similar shaped bottles for similar prices? Do you have a different feeling about them emotionally when you walk in, or do you not walk in one or the other? Do you have a preference? Would you drive 10 miles out of the way to go to one instead of 10 blocks away to go to another? You know, and the answer is typically people align themselves with one or the other based on a lot of the intangible, or what people believe to be intangible things about them. Well, I just like this one because it feels better. Well, why does it feel better? Do you think it might be because it was designed in a way that is totally aligned with the brand so that you felt exactly like you should when you walk in the door? And the answer is, yeah, that is why. It's because it's aligned. The brand is in alignment with its concept, with its pillars of what it offers and how it delivers and serves the customer. So I love to say, so learn from them. You should be doing the same thing, which is letting people know what they can expect from you. And Beth, what you just described was, you told people not to buy our product? What salesperson would ever do that? Well, it reminds me of the
Yeah.
old Miracle on 34th Street, the old movie where Santa tells them to go to Gimbel's down because they have it and we don't here at this store. Why would you do that? Because I want to help people out. Well, what happens?
Yeah.
People love you for helping them out. And consequently, when you do have something that you can serve them that will help them, they're going to take that meeting. They're going to take the call, and they're probably going to ink the deal because you've always done solid things for me.
Yeah.
I know
right.
that.
That's right.
I appreciate that. And I feel good about that because you did me a solid then. I'll do you a solid now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's not even just what you said is right, but it's not even that tit for tat sort of mentality of, oh, I owe somebody. It's not that. It is really what Maya Angelou always says. People may not remember what you said to them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And so if people feel respected, they feel as if you see them and have their best interests at heart, they're going to remember that. They're going to remember that you made them feel important enough to be honest with them. And so that is why I am all about being authentic, which means don't be smarmy, right? Like don't be somebody that you're not to get something that you probably don't deserve in the first place. It's one of those things that is just like, if you are honest and you are, the word is not overused. People say, well, authenticity. Well, I don't know what else is more important, really, because if you're not being authentic, you're being something that is misaligned, to your point, from a branding standpoint, from a human standpoint, from a relational standpoint, from all standpoints. If you are not being true, people pick up on that, right? People are not morons. And so if you're in a room with somebody, they know how you're making them feel. Oftentimes, my husband's fine with me saying this because we discuss him quite frequently. I will say to him, I don't think that you are being real with me right now. I think you're saying what you know I want to hear, but I don't think that's how you feel. So I would much rather hear the words that you think I might receive as like hard to hear, but I want to know what they are. Because if you don't know the truth of someone, if you don't know the authentic person, their branding, their product, their positioning, their belief system, if you don't know that, then how are you supposed to respond? I don't know that answer. I want to know what I'm dealing with always, which is, to your point, why I like Beth Dutton so much. I mean, you don't really ever question where you stand with a woman. and yet I have been somebody that over the course of my entire life has always shown up like that. But in the early 80s, right when I was growing up, I was very much reprimanded for that. I was the girl that in a classroom would say out loud what everybody was thinking, which is, why is this teacher, like, is he serious right now? I would say, like, Mr. So-and-so, why are you showing us this? Or Mrs. So-and-so, like, we know this. Can we move on? Like, what? I wanted to know why that people were going through motions. Going through motions is boring to me. Like, I want to know what's behind the motion. I want to know what's driving people. I want to know what they really think. And it might be people are afraid to do that because they're so afraid of those repercussions on the other side. Well, how's this going to be received? I should say this thing, so I'm going to say it because that's what's expected, and I'm going to keep the peace. And I'm like, well, ruffle some feathers, because keeping the peace is boring. In certain circumstances, I understand, but in the main, when you're trying to really relationally understand something, a principle, a concept, a human, then give it to me straight and let me decide how I feel about that. Let me decide that. That is respectful, because otherwise you're just trying to play this game and set up the answer so you feel fine and everybody's great and everybody can go to bed not mad at each other and everybody can pretend everything's fine. Well, really? But is that progress? Is that transformation? No, it's boring. It's boring.
Yeah. Well, and the whole thing is, it's boring for you. It's boring for the people who like you and your personal brand and what you represent. But there's an entire audience that's like, no, I want to be bored. It's the old story about IBM. No one ever got fired for buying IBM. And there are plenty of risk-averse people who can't handle the hot sauce the way you're serving it up, which is fine. Yeah. Because there are plenty of other personal brands that are more boring, are more pedestrian.
Aligned. Like
yeah, and they're more aligned with what you want. Let's face it. I don't want an electric car created by a billionaire, and I want a Ford Probe. Fine. There are those things out there, but what you have to do as a personal brand is know who you are and embrace that and let people know about it. Demonstrate that personal brand. You know, I like to say there are 2 D's that are important when it comes to branding. Number 1 is differentiation. And it's so appropriate that you're wearing a Yellowstone Dutton Ranch headgear there, that trucker hat, because the first branding, think about it, the first branding was for one thing only: differentiation. I put my brand on my brown cow, you put your brand on your brown cow, and that's how we know which brown that's how we know which brown cow is which. Differentiation, absolutely job 1 of branding. But right behind that is the other D, demonstration. You need to demonstrate over and over and over again exactly who you are, what you do, and how you do it. And again, longtime listeners of this podcast will know that I spent my formative years when learning about branding at McCann Erickson in Atlanta, Georgia, working on brands like Coca-Cola. Now, I talk about Coca-Cola all of the time just because it was the formative brand that finally got through my thick skull the power of saying the same thing over and over and over again. Since 1886, Coca-Cola has had somewhere north of 220 different taglines, all revolving around, let me say that again, all revolving around the same concepts of authenticity, refreshment, and sociability. I can go in and talk about those things all day long. I'm not going to. Just trust me on this. Coca-Cola is what Coca-Cola has always been because they've told us that. It's the real thing. They were the first cola to come out in 1886. They beat Pepsi by 1 year. Literally 1 year. And yet Coca-Cola is the real thing and always will be. They don't get tired of telling that story over and over again because that is exactly who they are, what they do, and how they do it. Same thing with you. You know, Beth, you've embraced a single word beautifully, remorseless. We've talked about the definition of that. Remorseless, I can't help but now see you as the avatar, the human avatar for that word in real life. Because again, remorseless does not say I am without guilt or without wrongdoing, but I will no longer let guilt define me and stop me from moving forward. You know, we could go all in on Ayn Rand's sanction of the victim idea, but I'm not a big Ayn Rand fan, so let's not go there. But let's just say you recognize the fact that, well, all of us, none of us are without sin. Regardless of your religiousness or lack thereof, we all have a little bit of stuff that we don't do perfectly or we've done some people wrong. The question is, can you get past that in a way that is truly authentic to you? And it's that authenticity. I hate that word because it's been so bastardized, but what's a better word than genuine?
It's synonymous for sure. Yeah, being exactly who you were created to be, because we all were made with a specific purpose in mind. And, you know, I've always known what I liked. I've always known what I don't like. I always know what sort of instantly makes me feel a certain way, which is, boy, I'm uncomfortable. Boy, I'm impatient. Boy, I don't want to be here. You know, you just know, we know these things. I know I'm an extrovert. I know that when I'm in a room filled with people, it brings me great joy and energy. I also know many people in my life whom I love dearly. My husband is one who says, nope, I'm good for a minute and then I got to go, because otherwise I become apoplectic and I need to leave this room in a hurry. And so what's been interesting is our open communication about that, which is I say to him things like, I got to go. I can't just sit here any longer, which in his world is like, I'm good right now. This is bringing me fulfillment and I'm filling my tank back up. And he also understands and recognizes, for me to fill my tank back up, I got to be moving. I've got to be around people. I either have to be running or in nature or out, and I have to be accomplishing and doing things. And for so long, people have made me feel guilty about that. people have said things to me like, well, what are you running from? And I'm like, boredom. I don't know. Stagnation. I don't really think that I think is rhetorical, because what I'm doing is I'm running towards exactly who I am. I am being exactly who I'm made to be. And so authentic, genuine, whatever it is. But I think that the terminology really just equates to living life every single day in a way that you were aligned to live, right? Like you were made with purpose and intention and certain things that bring you great joy. And the world needs all of us. The world needs absolutely every single kind of personality type: extroverts, introverts, artists, right? Musicians, pick a thing. It doesn't matter. We all have something that we have that brings other people great joy, but even more so brings us fulfillment in the moment. And so when you are authentically, again, leaning in, right, the terms, but when you're doing those things, you are embracing those giftings and skill sets. You're not only like the best version of yourself because you're happy, you're content, you're filled with joy, but other people feel that too, right? They may not know what you say, but they know how you're making them feel. And what you're making them feel is included in your joy. You're making them feel a part of something. You're making them perhaps tap into the things that bring them joy. And it's this reciprocity that is, wow, I see her or I see him doing things unapologetically, right? Without guilt. They're just doing it. They're not offending anybody. They're not pretending to be somebody they're not. They're living in this moment. And I can see this radiation of just joy coming off of them. I wonder if I can get there too. What do they have? What do they have that I don't? And my answer typically lands, again, I know we're not going down the Christianity talk right now, but it goes down the path of what they have is an acceptance. They have an acceptance of their true self. They no longer are saying, I'm living according to my parents' expectations. Boy, they expect me to go to college, so here I go. They expect me to get married, so, where's the little chapel? They expect all these things. They're not doing that anymore. They're saying, you know what? I am still a whole human being with mattering and value and worth if I don't do those things, if I do the things that I'm made to do.
Well, I am so completely in agreement with you. The framing that you gave, that these are gifts, or I think you used the word giftings, which is a new word to me, but I totally mean, I totally understand what you mean. And the idea that you are the perfect version of yourself already, so embrace that. I think that, again, this is kind of spiritual, kind of psychological, but I got to say it's also absolutely truly aligned with creating your personal brand or your small business brand, because there is no difference between your personal and your small business brand. Let's face it, until you have 50 to 500 employees, it's still you. Your reputation, everything about you defines what you are, who you are, what you do, and how you do it. So I just love that idea, though, that you are perfect. The question is, have you identified the perfect you with inside the box that is labeled with a whole bunch of other stuff? Again, remorseless. Great word to use when talking with Beth Fisher. Provocative. Hopefully a really good word when you're talking about me, because I am embracing that word as strongly as you're embracing remorseless. And I don't think it's an overpromise and underdeliver. Certainly not this episode of the Nonfiction Brand Podcast, because it's been with Beth Fisher, who you can see why I love her so much. Really an interesting conversation, a wonderful person. Again, I want to let people know that Beth's book, you can get that book on over at Amazon.com. So go get Beth's book, Remorseless, at Amazon.com. And also, Beth, where can people connect with you online? And don't forget to pump your podcast.
Yes, the easiest way to find me is BethFisher.com. You can actually find my podcast there as well. I have the Remorseless Podcast. That is wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts, right? So that's out there too. But BethFisher.com has everything. It's got the most recent episodes. It has the books. It has coaching. It has just me. So that is where I am.
Well, I want to say thank you again for being on the Nonfiction Brand Podcast. What a treat. I would love for you listeners to like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast wherever you actually get it, because that does help other people find it. And also, check it out next week with another exciting guest. But for now, I'm your host, DP Knudten, and she is
Beth Fisher.
And I'll be talking at you guys next week. Bye-bye. All right. So live stream listeners, this was live. Someone asked, is this live? Yes, it is live. But now we're going to say bye-bye. So check us out the next time you see that DP Knudten's going live. Oh, also check out the Nonfiction Brand podcast wherever you get fine podcasts for free, because let's face it, it's worth it when I have guests on like Beth Fisher. Until then, that's it for the Nonfiction Brand podcast. I am, of course, DP Knudten, and I'll be talking at you again next time.